In this lesson, we'll work on building up some of the accent pieces for our aircraft. Okay, so really, as I mentioned in the previous lesson, we're pretty much done with some of the major sections of this aircraft. Now it's just going to be a matter of adding a few just sort of little finishing touches onto this. So one thing that I'd like to do is add just a couple of little ribs on this, again, just to kind of visually add a little bit more interest in here. So with this, we can use something like a primitive polygon torus. We'll go ahead and just pull this out. Might just move this down to make this a little bit easier to see. Now with a torus, and this is something that we get irregardless of whether or not we make this as a polymesh or as a surface torus, each one of these has the ability to actually control sort of the start and the end angle. So we can actually come in and start to dial this down. So maybe if we find that we wanted to create something that is maybe a little bit more of a C shape or a U shape, we could definitely do that. Now let's also come in here and we can start to adjust the cross section. Now the cross section is really the overall thickness of this, and you can see just a little bit goes a pretty long ways. So what we might need to do is come in and start to adjust this to some fairly low values until we find something that is going to work for us. In my case, looks like something along the lines of 0.3 might do the trick. I'll go ahead and switch to my rotate tool and just rotate this down an even 90 degrees. Switch to my move tool and pull this forward. Now what we might need to do is start to either dial up the main, which is the overall width of this. We can either do that or just use our scale tool, whichever works best for us. So we'll come in and just start to tweak this until that works. Again, might just be as easy to come in and just switch to our scale tool and just do the job that way. So essentially what I'm trying to do is come in and just tweak this until this is going to fit kind of right inside the main body of this aircraft. So just scaling this in. Might even need to press the plus key on my keyboard a couple of times just to make sure that everything is still working properly. Now at this point, things start to become maybe a little bit tricky because we want to make sure that the overall rib is able to fit pretty decently and pretty uniformly across this aircraft body, because again, this is a pretty nice cylindrical shape. But once we start to get into some of these ends, we might need to come in here and actually just tweak those a little bit more. Now, we don't have to get too precise, because what I'm going to do is actually just take these points right up here along the top. With those selected, I can just switch to my scale tool and scale those until those really just disappear inside this main body. Now, while I also have these selected, again, just to make a few minor modifications, go ahead and tag all of these edges that are right in here. So again, just a simple loop selection. And now I should be able to come in here and scale those out. Just to, again, add a little bit more thickness to those. And again, just to add a little bit more definition, what I should be able to do is switch to my split edge tool and maybe come in here and add a split just right on either side of that. You can see how that starts to now force this into a little bit more of a kind of a pinched, sharp shape. And just come in and tag those points again, just making sure that everything is going to fit properly. There we are, very nice. So you can see now with just a little bit of modification here, we have this nice little rib that just kind of acts as a nice little accent piece for this aircraft. Now if we wanted to duplicate this, it's just a matter of selecting it, Control D to duplicate, and then pull that back a little ways. If I press Control D to duplicate again, you can see that Softimage will remember that duplication. It'll move the duplicate back that exact same amount. So again, just a nice little decorative element that we can have going on here. Now another thing I'd like to do is add sort of some little exhaust pipes here that might be coming off the engine. So to do this, I'll actually rely on the same torus geometry. So I'll again just make myself a new polygon torus. Now this time I'll come in and take this start, or rather this end U, and pull this down quite a bit. So maybe something like 45 degrees for that end U. And as far as the overall divisions, we can start to adjust that up or down. Because this is going to be a relatively simple piece of geometry, we really don't need that many divisions, so I'll probably dial this down to something like 3. Okay, now, just becomes now sort of a matter of sort of working and massaging this into place. So we can come in here, and I'll just swing that up and around. I hit the F key on my keyboard to frame that up. Switch to my Move tool. And again, just try to work this until it pretty much gets into the area where I need it to be. There we are. So I'm trying to get something that is angled in a way that will give us just a little bit more of a shape up here. So sort of angled backwards in my case. Maybe just angle that a little bit more if I need to. There we are. So something like that should work pretty well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and use something like that. Maybe just move that down a little bit more. In my case, that might seem a little bit too high. There we go. So now I can take something like this piece of geometry and just make a few minor little adjustments to this. So for example, if I wanted this to maybe be rounded out a little bit more along this top edge instead of just this thin little pipe here, I'll go ahead and just grab all these edges, switch this to COG for my scale tool to make sure my manipulator is right in the middle, Control D to duplicate, and just scale those edges in, and then Control D to duplicate once again. And I'll just pull these edges in. I might actually switch, in this case, to my local mode. And again, might want to just go ahead and switch to my transform tool and make sure that this transform components independently is now turned off, because I don't want these edges to just fly all over the place. Now I can scale those in, or rather pull those in, and now get something that looks a little bit nicer whenever I go to smooth that out. There we are, very good. So once again, select these, Control D to duplicate, pull that forward, Control D to duplicate that a couple more times. There we are, very nice. Now what I can also do is take these, and I should be able to duplicate these over to the opposite side of my aircraft. So I'll just go up to Edit, Duplicate Instantiate, and Duplicate Symmetry. Again, I'll swing these along the YZ plane, so that should flip it along the X-axis. Alright, there we go. So that should now take care of some of these additional little features that we can start to add onto the main body of this aircraft. Again, just to add a little bit more believability, a little bit more realism, just a little bit more visual interest overall. So now that we have that in place, what we can do in our next lesson is start to build out the main seat for our pilot.